Hi, I'm Barry Boyce, founding editor of Mindful and Mindful.org, and I'm delighted to be hosting Nigel Girgrah, MD, PhD, and Dr. Najmedin Meshkati as part of the Healing Healthcare Summit. In this session, we'll be discussing systems, practices, and cultures that promote well-being in healthcare organizations. And please note that you can purchase lifetime access to all of our Healing Healthcare Summit content in a downloadable format at mindful.org/healthcare. So I'd like to begin by introducing myself and our guests. In 2013, I co-founded Mindful Magazine and mindful.org. I'm a longtime meditator, meditation teacher, author, and editor. Dr. Nigel Girgrah, welcome Nigel, is the Chief Wellness Officer at Ochsner Health. He leads an effort to improve the professional fulfillment of physicians and advanced practice providers, focusing on enhanced practice efficiency and personal and team resilience, as well as the building of an organizational culture that promotes provider well-being. Dr. Girgrah is a practicing transplant hepatologist and serves as the medical director of liver transplantation at Ochsner Health. Dr. Najmedin Meshkati, hello Naj, has been a professor of engineering at the University of Southern California for 35 years, focusing on human factors and safety in complex technological systems. For the past 20 years, Dr. Meshkati has been working on patient safety, safety culture, and high reliability organizational issues in healthcare. Since 2016, he has been a commissioner of the Joint Commission and on the board of directors of the Center for Transforming Healthcare. Welcome to you both, and welcome to all who are taking part in this session.
Great to be here, Barry.
So I'd like to start out by asking each of you to describe for us your assessment of the main strategic challenges that the pandemic has brought to the fore for our healthcare systems. Just a simple little question for starters.
Yeah, where do you begin with that? So I think the pandemic, Barry, has imposed challenges for most leaders managing any strategic plan. But with respect to sort of well-being in the healthcare sector, I think pre-pandemic, there had been an evolution in the understanding that well-being is a leading quality indicator, if not the leading quality indicator in healthcare. And this culminated in a report out by the National Academy of Medicine in 2019 that Dr. Meshkati edited, which was essentially a call to action. And that described that burnout is associated with poor patient experience, poor quality and safety outcomes, worse financial performance for organizations, decreased discretionary effort and turnover. And so we and many organizations have put together over the 2 years before the pandemic an evidence-informed strategy rooted in measurement. And for us, that focused on Barry, things like practice efficiency or workflow, leadership development, organizational culture, and yes, resilience. But I think we were a little timid about leading with that because we didn't want our healthcare workers to think that the organizations were saying just do a little more yoga and everything will be okay. And then the pandemic rolled in, Barry, and that blew everything up. And I think quickly we and many folks had to get down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think wave one was all about shifting to crisis support, at an organizational level, how we communicated that, we'd have childcare, jobs would be safe, compensation would be safe. Then, partnering with behavioral health services to meet the needs, do unit rounding. And then as we emerged from wave one, it was about resilience. And I was surprised at the appetite for resilience offerings and mindfulness offerings. And so we had to think about how to put together those things and meet the needs of our healthcare workforce. And then later in the year and going into last year, it was for me all about mental health, anticipating what was going to happen during the pandemic, measuring mental health outcomes like PTSD and depression, destigmatizing the conversation, and then sort of delivering on different offerings to support the mental health needs. So yeah, it's been sort of, schizophrenic, and we've had to shift and pivot many times over the last year and a half.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Naj, what would you say?
Hi, Barry, and hi, Nigel. I think whatever Dr. Girgrah mentioned, I second that. He beautifully characterized what's going on with the healthcare industry and clinicians because of COVID. I just want to accentuate some of the points that Nigel mentioned, particularly about that report of the National Academy of Medicine, the National Academy of Engineering that came out in October 2019. Please note that that report came in October 2019. I was one of its reviewers. I have a few slides that I can show it later, if you like, about highlights of that report. Pretty much basically the same thing that Nigel said. That report came out in October 2019, which was before the pandemic. But the important thing is in that report, it really was a rude awakening for our healthcare system, for clinicians' burnout. According to that report that I have it in my short PowerPoints, between 35 and 54%, 35 and 54% of clinicians being basically people that were frontline of the healthcare, like doctors and nurses, 35 to 54% of the clinicians, they declare they are suffering from substantial burnout. See, that was before the pandemic. And then if you add the pandemic and the workload and the stress and the problems at home front on that, you are really dealing with a perfect storm. And that's why we are really, in my humble judgment, in a very dire situation with respect to the impact of COVID on clinicians' well-being and on their burnout. There was an article in New York Times, a very good full-page article, I think in July 2021, that I have a few highlights of that corroborates what I have said to some of those prediction or analysis of the National Academy report. I think what we are facing, particularly in light of this one after each other variants that are coming, is going to be very serious, and we really need to take a very strategic decision about how to deal with this. I call it the burnout as an endemic for clinicians.
You could go ahead and share those slides now if you want to. I mean, I think that's appropriate.
If it's okay, sure. I brought it up and I summarized that because I didn't want to take your time too much, but this is basically, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see the full screen, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. This is just, I put together a few slides to summarize some of my points and that about mindfulness and how do I see this here, and particularly the subtitle, New Challenges in the COVID Area. This is the copy of that report that Nigel mentioned, taking action about clinician burnout, systems approach to professional well-being. I just want to point out to you and your audience that this is called a consensus report, meaning a committee, a distinguished committee, interdisciplinary committee put that together. Then it went to some official reviewers. Yours truly was one of them. and then it came back and it has the sign of all those distinguished committee members. It's a long report, 333 pages. And the reason that I, as a professor of engineering, became a reviewer of this very important similar report, because my earlier work dissertation dealt with human mental workload measurement, and also I edited a book on mental workload in 1988 and the issues of the overload and the stress and the human error and human performance degradation that comes from external, extra or excessive mental workload. This, going back to the report, this is that article that I mentioned that to you that came out in New York Times. It was a full-page article about clinicians' burnout in New York Times. This is the online version of it that one of the doctors that they quote a lot in that article. As you see, the subtitle also says the burnout. These are some nuggets from this report. American healthcare workers are in crisis, and this is a very important thing. Again, this is as of last July. I would venture to say that is even more critical. And they are battered and burned, burnout, again, within the clinician. Particularly, they feel that they are a little bit betrayed and unappreciated by the public because they don't follow the social distancing, mask and vaccine. And then doctors and nurses are overworked, of course. And then there have been a lot of, unfortunately, fatality among the clinicians and healthcare workers in the United States, according to this article in New York Times. What we call the definition of clinician based on the National Academy are basically these people I mentioned earlier that provide direct patient care, and those are basically physicians and nurses. I highlighted the important points in this slides in red so that you can latch onto it as I go fast, and that this is my little secret. But of course, I can provide you with a copy of this. But these are some important statistics about the clinician burnout from that report. And again, please remember that it was before the COVID. COVID exacerbated that. And this is a very important statistic, which I mentioned earlier. 35 to 50% of nurses and physicians, they report a substantial symptom of burnout. This is a very important number for our medical school student also, which is much higher. That's also very alarming, 40 to 60%. And this is an area, this last bullet fits very much with my direct area of research, patient safety, medical error, high reliability organization. And the clinicians who are subject to burnout, they report twice likely of major medical error. And they are also more vulnerable to lawsuit. The rate of error is twice than normal for the clinicians that are subjected to burnout. And then this is also among the, based on some statistics of nurses, they report 5 times likely to omit necessary care. Again, these nurses that are subject to that. I could continue this, but I would rather to stop here and maybe come back to talk about what is the systems orientation to this.
Yeah,
I just add, Naj, I think it was interesting that, you know, with that National Academy of Medicine report out that you discussed and you were a reviewer, that they had the foresight to make one of the co-chairs an engineer rather than a healthcare provider. So I think Dr. Castle was one of the co-chairs, but the other co-chair was an engineer, a colleague of yours, I think up in Wisconsin. I think just acknowledges that it's a systems issue. It's not an individual issue.
I would say we engineers, as Rodney Dangerfield said, we don't get any respect. But in the case of this report, one of my most distinguished, fantastic colleague, Professor Pascal Carian from University of Wisconsin Industrial Engineering Department. She was the co-chair of that report. And I think the committee did a fantastic job in this report, and I've been using that as a handout in my classes.
Yeah, I think one of the key points in this session, we have a lot of clinicians who will be listening in here, watching and paying attention to this, is that well-being initiatives need to be seen and understood in a systems context. Otherwise, it's, as you were saying, Nigel, it's just saying to somebody, hey, suck it up and do a little bit of yoga and some meditation, and we'll get through this. Whereas we have to look at how the whole thing is engineered. So Nigel, with your experience, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that's not to diminish the importance of resilience and mindfulness, but I think pre-pandemic, as Naj was alluding to, it was the acknowledgement that we had to get upstream and decrease the number of punches that clinicians were taking in the face. I mean, the pandemic has sort of, made, I think, the importance of resilience, acknowledge that there's an essential need for that. But I think we do have to get upstream, and that's what the National Academy of Medicine report out was getting at.
From your firsthand experience with clinicians right in the trenches right now,
yeah,
and we're also in the middle of apparently a nationwide, what they're calling the Great Resignation, where people are starting to think, maybe I don't want to do this job I've been doing anymore. Are you facing that in healthcare, that people have gotten to the point where they're thinking maybe it's time to get out? Or
well, yeah, I mean, I think turnover is probably the great existential threat to healthcare delivery in our country or globally. And we're seeing that particularly with our nursing colleagues, either choosing to leave organizations or sadly leave the profession. It's estimated that 18% of our workforce that existed pre-pandemic does not exist anymore. And so that is a major issue, something that we're thinking about. We can talk more in this discussion. Certainly there's a national conversation going on about turnover. And as Naj mentioned, so this was an issue that existed prior to the pandemic. 35 to 54% of our physicians, an overwhelming number of our nurses. And that is the biggest predictor of issues as we go into the pandemic. So PTSD, depression, leaving the profession. So it's something that we and many are thinking long and hard about.
So this is a mindfulness in healthcare session. So where do practices such as mindfulness and related contemplative practices fit into these overall systemic strategies and goals?
Well, I would just add that, we're talking about strategy, but as Dr. Meshkati knows, there's a famous quote by Peter Drucker, a management guru, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can't have an organizational strategy incorporating mindfulness or resilience if there isn't a culture that supports it. So is there a culture that supports both macro and micro recovery. So does your organization support vacations, weekends, long weekends, evening decompression? Do the leadership behavioral norms sort of correlate with that? So it's one thing to sort of say, we want you to decompress, but then as a leader, am I texting you or calling you when you're on break? And then even within healthcare during the work day, are there opportunities for micro recovery? So I think there are some true emergencies, but I do think within the workday, there's always opportunities to take breaks, whether that's 20 to 30 seconds to pause, or breaks to get a meal. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that the culture has to support, this, and then you build a strategy around that. And I think my takeaway, and I'm certainly not an expert like you, Barry, on mindfulness or resilience. I'm getting to know a lot more about that, but it's very individualized. So what appeals to you in terms of mindfulness and resilience may not appeal to me. So you have to, I think, reach people in different ways, whether that's, digital apps or audio sessions that support it, whether it's full-blown courses that we're offering to help with this, or bite-sized, YouTube videos. I just think you have to be fairly nuanced in how you sort of build a strategy around supporting this.
Yeah, I want to support what you're saying there, and that I think, particularly in a context like this, we need to take a very broad understanding of what we mean by being mindful. Being mindful includes inquiring into causes and effects, into overall systemic environments, so that you make more mindful choices, rather than simply saying, okay, this is a personal practice you do to calm yourself. It's, having a mindful organization means that we look at things like, are we subjecting people to 24-hour exposure to interruption, which we know to not be a mentally healthy thing to do, as you were saying. So I think we want to really here take that kind of broader view altogether about that, and also that the mindfulness practice that helps somebody is the one that they'll do.
Right.
Not something that you impose or proselytize about. So again, the system and the culture is extremely important. So let's talk about culture a little bit, Naj. And it is interesting that the Peter Drucker School of Management is actually up the road from you in Claremont. And there are some mindfulness people up there, because Drucker advocated, a self-management as a key form of management for the future. So say a bit about culture and why that's so important.
Sure. In fact, Peter Drucker has been one of my idols, and the quote that Dr. Girgrah mentioned, "The culture eats strategy for breakfast," has been on my wall, and I've quoted that on some of my writings. The issue of safety culture, in my judgment, has been a very important issue. There are some major catastrophic accidents, like Chernobyl accident, and nuclear accident in Ukraine on April 26, 1986, has been primarily attributed to the safety culture at the plant and Soviet Union's former Soviet Union safety culture. Many other accidents also, fast forward to Boeing 737, two crashes that killed 346 people. they have been attributed to, again, corporate culture of Boeing and the problems at FAA. And in between, we have had many accidents. The wall of my office of photos of the BP Texas City refinery explosion of 2005, BP Deepwater Horizon accident of 2010. All of these have been attributed to unhealthy safety culture. And that's why the nuclear power industry and many other industries, they have really taken a very important steps on that. They are coming with traits of healthy safety culture. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is also promoting that. The Trade Association in Nuclear Power Industry, the INPO, Institute of Nuclear Power Operation, and Nuclear Energy Institute, they are also supportive of that. And the healthcare industry has becoming very interested, and they are also embracing the concept of safety culture very strongly. In my own simple mind, I analogized a healthy safety culture with human immune system. As the human immune system tries to protect body and fends off diseases, this is what a healthy safety culture can do for an organization. And for the context of our discussion of mindfulness, I would say safety culture is really the mindfulness of the organization, meaning that the same way that a human being has purposeful pauses or meditation and mindfulness, an organization as a legal entity should practice these things at the organizational level. And of course, there are many traits for healthy safety culture that they can be enforced or nurtured or increased by that. And this way we can really increase and strengthen our immune system, because an organization with a healthy safety culture can somehow detect some of the precursors and fight the precursors of the diseases. We can also, using the metaphor, inoculate them with some of that and going through training and improvement. The points that Dr. Girgrah mentioned earlier about what an organization can do in order to take care of the burnouts of its employees in the case of a healthcare is extremely important. If you look at that systems model, which was presented by this National Academy of Medicine report, it has really 3 circles. I have it on the PowerPoint. Again, I can show it to you. But a big component of the role of all these factors, impact of that on the clinician, is the job design and organizational factors. See, that is very important. This is something that we at the healthcare industry organization, we can control. I can pick one of them, which is like electronic health record and interface, usability of that. That has been a major source of stress for our clinicians before the pandemic. Now it's even more aggravating. And there are many other job-related factors that we can improve. Workload level, of course, we may not be able to affect it that much in terms of the number of people that will get infected. We need to treat them. But there are many things within the aspect of the job design, interface design, communication, reporting, and that we could work on that to reduce the burden of this workload on the clinicians.
I'm actually glad you mentioned the electronic health record. I wasn't trying to get, I was sort of shying away from getting too granular, but that, before the pandemic, like 2/3 of articles that you'd see on particularly physician burnout were all about the electronic health record and the administrative burden and the clerical tasks. And we've even surveyed our group, and most time studies suggest that, physicians are spending more time looking at the EHR and the computer than they are, looking at patients. And that is something, we can talk about later that may be a silver lining, as I think there's a call to action to really improve that, because that's been a big sore spot for many, many years.
So, jumping off from that, Nigel, Naj was just talking about job design, and you're this electronic records is a job design issue. My brother used to do accident investigations for the Navy, and it infuriated him no end that the Navy continued practices that led to key people being heavily sleep deprived. It was built into the system, and they believed it to be a kind of a mark of almost a heroic soldier, is sleep deprived. But sleep deprivation is a direct cause of accidents. And so when you're facing clinicians who are dealing with job design that may be depriving them of sleep or appropriate rest, in your role in promoting well-being, how are you able to respond to that?
Well, I think that gets back to, we've talked a lot about culture. I'm not talking about organizational culture, but the culture that exists within the healthcare industry. And it's interesting you mention the Navy, because I think there are many similarities between the healthcare industry and the military industry in terms of recruiting elite professionals that won't complain, that are there to serve, whether it's serve your country or serve your patients. And that comes with an incredible upside, right? You want diligent folks that will be there to protect either your country or protect your patients, but it comes with a downside. And that comes with sort of psychological safety issues that Naj was alluding to. And I think it's interesting when we talk about mental health stigma, that's an industry that we've started to look at. And we've started to partner with some mental health startups that actually sort of came out of the military in terms of how do we think about ways to destigmatize mental health, to put self-compassion first. So I don't have a great answer for you, but you're touching on a big problem and something that we need to address.
Well, I think you make very good points, and our clinicians out there will know that they're part of a uniformed service, and people who are in uniform to serve others, they take a lot of hits because of and they're willing to be loyal and do anything, and how we create a culture that doesn't cause them to hurt themselves in that effort. And I'm glad to hear that you're partnering with some mental health organizations, to mental health startups, to to try to address that. We actually have just a few minutes left, maybe 7 or 10 minutes. So how about the road ahead? If you wanted to, Naj, say 2 or 3 points that you think are critical for us all to be paying attention to, and then I'll kick it back to Nigel as well for that.
Sure, Barry. Just a point about sleep-deprived workers and clinicians, and that there is a concept that we deal with in human factors called fatigue. Of course, everybody knows about that. But there is also another phenomena that we have observed first at the major, again, refinery accident. It's called cumulative fatigue. Fatigue is, of course, if you stay awake and then you stay awake and you get fatigue, or you work hard and you get fatigue. But cumulative fatigue, when this fatigue accumulates over and over on the top of each other, and that affects human information processing and human performance. It has a substantial impact on the performance degradation. I can remember from that study of this refinery explosion that that board operator worked 29 consecutive days of 12-hour shift. 29 consecutive days of 12-hour shift. This is really causing cumulative fatigue, which is above and beyond simple fatigue that we are dealing with. That's one point that I want to make, which we need to realize that we need to recognize that, and we have to prevent that. I mean, these are preventable issues. This is not like that a whole population go to a super spreader concert and they get COVID and they burden the healthcare system. That is also preventable, but not as easy as this one that we can recognize and we can do it at the organizational level. See, and going back, this is a segue to answering your last question. I think the most important thing for us, at least from where I'm coming from, is to recognize that we have some issues that it can be prevented, and then do a systematic analysis of that. We can use the National Academy of Medicine report as a systems analysis, or other models of systems analysis that we have. Look at the level of the system. We have a technique which is called AXIMAP, developed by Professor Jens Rasmussen, the late professor from Denmark, that we look at accident analysis. We looked at from different layers that they contribute to that accident, all the way from governmental regulation down to frontline workers and the design of the interface and workstation. I think the first element that we have to do is really to recognize that we may have some issues in our system. Going back to the terminology that I learned from you, Barry, is this purposeful pauses. This organization, they need to pause once in a while to look inside and have some sort of a situational awareness of what is going on to them, and then take a systematic approach to address that. And there are different tools and methods for doing that. AXIMAP of Professor Jens Rasmussen is one of them.
Well, that very much mimics a certain kind of mindfulness practice of inquiry, where you pause and inquire of yourself, okay, what's going on right now? For example, you might notice that you're suffering from cumulative fatigue. Say, okay, so what can we do about that? How do we trace that? How do we look at the whole picture? And so it's very inspiring to me to hear the same kind of mindfulness instructions being applied at a cultural level or a systemic level, rather than, as we've been saying, you just, on the level of personal practices. We're taking a public health approach. So Nigel, I'd like to hear a few words from you.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty going forward, clearly, and I think we're learning to become more comfortable with uncertainty. There are a few things I think I'm relatively certain about, and just a few ideas. One is that organizations need to measure the current state and make that an iterative process. So you need to measure not just turnover, but burnout, depression, PTSD, but equally important, like drivers of burnout. So how much time are clinicians spending on the EHR? Look at, workflow, delegation of tasks. What's the perception of leadership in the organization? What's the perception of culture? What's the perception of teamwork? So that has to be measured not just once, but on an ongoing basis. Secondly, you need to communicate the importance, not just at the national level, but at the organizational level, that this is an imperative that the organization is going to take on. And then I think about retention. To retain those who are still here, you have to get upstream, destigmatize mental health, invest in resilience training, whether that's during onboarding of our new hires, but more ideally at within the nursing schools, within the medical schools. You need to create a pipeline for the future. I mentioned that 18% are gone. So you need to work with your local community colleges, nursing colleges, med schools to create the future. And then lastly, I'll just say that for the 82% who are still here, you have to take an inventory of current tasks that they're doing, and what are value-added tasks and what are menial tasks. What are tasks that can be delegated to somebody else? And I think we have to take a hard look at things that our physicians and nurses are doing that don't add value, that just create stress, just create cognitive load, and eliminate them, engineer them out of our system. That's the only way that we're going to stay afloat until the next wave of nurses and physicians come.
Oh, thank you, Nigel. That's inspiring. In fact, that a slow and steady revolution is necessary. Naj, I think maybe you're going to get the last word here, just about a minute or so.
That's an honor. I just want to say something that I learned in last 35 years conducting research on safety culture of several safety-sensitive industry, nuclear, aviation, petrochemical, offshore drilling, refining, and others. One lesson that I learned is really the important role of the leadership. In fact, the word leaders and leadership is a key linchpin of safety culture traits and all the activities that we do. If I may have the last word, I say it's upon the leaders and the leadership of our organization to be cognizant about organizational mindfulness, safety culture, and do something to address that. If they are missing in action, if they are asleep at the switch, we cannot achieve that.
Thank you very much. Well, I like this term, organizational mindfulness, and I think we'll hope for that for the future. And I think safety includes mental health too, and that's something I'm taking away from here. Mental health is perhaps the critical element in safety in healthcare. So thank you both, and thank you for your time today, and thank you for those of you who've been listening in. If you want to find out more about the topics covered today, you may go to Dr. Girgrah's bio page at Ochsner Health. That's OCHSNER. You can Google that, and his blog posts appear there. Dr. Meshkati pointed to a National Academy of Sciences report, Taking Action Against Clinician Burnout, a Systems Approach to Professional Well-Being. And he also points to a paper he co-authored, COVID-19, an urgent call for coordinated, trusted sources to tell everyone what they need to know and do. It was widely read, published in March 2020 in the National Academy of Medicine Perspective. I need to make a little plug here for Mindful Magazine and mindful.org, the world's leading secular mindfulness publication. You may access our digital library of thousands of articles, guided meditations, and videos Plus, get 6 beautiful issues delivered straight to your home throughout the year. We're pleased to offer Healing Healthcare attendees a special subscription rate. Go to mindful.org/healthcare-subscribe to learn more. And lastly, I'd like to ask you to please rate this session before you leave. There's a rate session button below your video in Wova. It will take only 1 minute, and your input is very helpful to us. And thanks again, Nigel and Naj.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Naj.
Thank you, Dr. Girgrah. Thank you, Barry. It was a pleasure.
And thank you all for your time. Bye now.
Bye-bye.